Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Development Talk 3 with the title Risks, Perception, and the Pandemic Resilience in Urban Life. My name is Deti Rahma and I am your MC today. Thank you for joining with us in Development Talk 3. I hope this event will give us an insightful and determination of policy to avoid and reduce the risks and also the victim of COVID-19. Let's starting this event. For opening our talk today, please deliver your speech. The Dean of Faculty Creative Design and Digital Business, Associate Professor Imam Baihaki. Time is yours.
Thank you. Very good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you to Pak Arfan for initiating this event. And secondly, I would like to sincerely thanks to Professor Sulfikar Amir from NTU Singapore, who came here virtually. And somehow we also thank to this pandemic somehow. Because of this pandemic, many things has been possible that we never thought before, like inviting someone without actually flying him or her to our campus. So once again, thank you, Professor Sulfikar Amir, for coming with us. As in our previous discussion just now, I think your area is really fit with our faculty. This is the new faculty in ITS. We've been going through the restructuring of the faculty from 10 faculties into 7 faculties. And this is one of the faculties which is the combination between business and management and also design. So yeah, because your area is your first degree is design and your second and third degree is about community development, so developing studies. I think we can do a lot of things in near future. We can do collaboration both in teaching and also I'm hoping we can do some of the research collaboration between 2 countries and 2 universities, of course. Bapak and Ibu who joined with us today, COVID-19 has struck us since early January or early this year, and this year become, the year 2020 become very special year for everyone and has forced our life turn upside down. This pandemic has forced us to change the way we do things. Not only the way we do teaching, but also the way we do things. Now, we cannot do shake hands. We cannot do many things that we normally do. And of course, fighting with this pandemic events is really very challenging. One of the most challenging aspects is the perception of the people. Not only in the rural area, but also in urban area. Yesterday, I watched in CNN, there was a city hall meetings in one city in US. I was quite surprised that some of the citizens of that city came into the city councils protesting why their life has been mandated by pandemic. So it's not only Surabayans, people who are famous in Bonek, yeah? Bonek is Pondonekat, or it's not easy to regulate people in Surabaya, but also people in many parts of the world, including developing worlds, including developed world such as the US. So I think this topic today will be really giving insightful to us how we are going through this pandemics, how we are passing through this pandemic events. And I believe Professor Sulfikar Amir will be giving us a lot of insights in terms of urban life, in terms of perception of the peoples, including from many different aspects such as sociology and so on. And I'm hoping that this talk by Professor Sulfikar Amir will open up insight for us, open up our things to how to tackle this pandemic events, not only from medical aspect, but also from sociology and archaeological aspect. The how do we approach this problem is really needs a multidiscipline approaches, not only single discipline approach. So last but not least, I would like to thank you for everyone who are supporting this event. And I hope you all enjoying this talk this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Imam. The guest speaker is Associate Professor Sulfikar Amir from School of Social Science, Nanyang Technology University, Singapore. Now we come to main event. Join me to welcome Dr. Arfan Fahmi as the head of Development Studies ITS. Mr. Arfan, you can start the event.
Thank you, Bu Teti. Very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the event. Thank you, Pak Sulfikar, who virtually attend and participate and giving some insight and also the horizons of how to handle this pandemic, especially related to belief and also the expectation that the governments and the community will have to overcome this problem personally. Let me read a short CV of Pak Sul. Pak Sulfikar Amir, PhD, is an associate professor of science, technology, and society. We normally call STS in the sociology program, School of Social Sciences, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, since 2008. And he actually finished his bachelor in design, industrial product design, Faculty of Art and Design, Institute Teknologi Bandung. And then graduate program in development studies, Institute Teknologi Bandung. Then also Master of Science and Design, Industrial Design, School of Design, Arizona State University. And Doctor of Philosophy, Department of Science and Technology and Studies, Lisalia Polytechnics Institutes. Without further ado, join me to welcome Associate Professor Sulfikar Amir from School of Social Sciences, Nanyang Technological University. Floor is yours, Pak Sul.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arfan. Dean Imam, ladies and gentlemen, all participants, very good afternoon. This is actually my second talk that I give to development studies at ETS, and I'm incredibly thankful for the invitation. And I'm very delighted to share what I have done for the past few weeks in regard with risk perception. So as Dr. Arfan has mentioned, I've been working on projects on disaster resilience for some time. I started my study or my inquiry into this area right after Japan saw one of the largest nuclear disaster in the 21st century. Probably not the one, but the largest nuclear disaster. So since 2013, I've been working on disaster resilience, specifically on nuclear disaster in Fukushima, Japan. And from there, I moved to a number of other projects. And at the moment, I'm currently working on a comparative study of city resilience in Southeast Asia, looking into how major cities or mega cities respond to disruption and disturbance, and build a capacity to bounce back in the event of a crisis. And I'm looking at three mega cities in Southeast Asia: Jakarta, Bangkok, and Manila. But then, after, I think, when COVID-19 started to break out back in February and then March, I switched my attentions on disaster resilience to, COVID-19 pandemic. And I've been working with a number of groups in Indonesia in looking at how communities and institutions are responding to the crisis. Although there are some problems that emerge out of the dynamics of this pandemic, especially in urban centers in Indonesia. It's interesting to see how different groups of people, how different institutions and governments across the country, especially in Java Islands, show some kind of diversity of resilience capacity. And I found this to be very interesting as an academic, although at the same time, I'm a bit concerned about the sort of inadequate ability of some governments in handling the pandemic. Just to give you sort of a sense of what I've been working on. So one example of projects that I did with a group of people in Jakarta, as well as in my lab here in NTU, is to create a sort of alternative strategy for cities in Indonesia in coping with the pandemic. And I work with a group of volunteers in looking at how community, how responses are emerging from the community level. And this is something that I would like to share with you, in this talk, because I think this is a very fundamental in our understanding of how resilience is built within community. And I think it's highly relevant if you look at the situation in Surabaya. So let me share my slides first. Maybe Pak Arfan, can you help me to enable me? Yeah. Or who's the host?
Fatur, please open the share screen.
Now it's ready, but Sulfikar.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm still disabled, so maybe you can allow me to share my slides.
Now it's ready, but Sulfikar.
Okay, yeah. Okay, can you see my slide now?
Yes, very clearly.
Okay. Thank you. So, so my talk today is particularly about risk perception, because this is a very important topic when we talk about pandemic crisis that we are dealing with. But before I go into explaining, what risk perception is and how it relates to, pandemic resilience, let me give you some sort of a theoretical framework from a sociological point of view in understanding this pandemic. Because I'm a sociologist, I would like to give you this basic understanding of how sociologists looked at the pandemic. So when we talk about pandemic, epidemic, endemic, or virus outbreak, or whatever you call it, depending on, of course, the scale and the magnitude of the virus spread, it can be seen from two perspectives. One is that pandemic is a natural phenomenon, or more specifically, it is a biological phenomenon, because it revolves around the existence of this biological entity that we call a virus, which cause harms to human body. And in order to respond to the existence of the virus, we need medical interventions. And this is exactly what people are doing around the world in responding to the crisis. Of course, the most effective or the most powerful response to virus is the use of vaccine. But while the vaccine is not yet available, and another way of responding is by doing testing, which is to try to find the people who are infected, and when those who are infected are found, they will be treated. So these are medical interventions because it is a biological phenomenon. On the other hand, pandemic can also be seen as a social phenomenon. Why? Because the transmission or the spread of the virus is largely facilitated by social interaction. And in responding to that, we need social interventions so that the virus spread can be contained. And social interventions include, isolation, which means isolating those who are infected or potentially have been potentially infected. And at the same time, we control interactions between individuals. So in a time of pandemic where the vaccine is not yet available, social interventions are even more crucial because our ability to contain the virus spread and to deal with the pandemic relies on this set of social interventions that comes from the collaborations of different institutions in society. So when we talk about flattening the curve, right, I believe everyone is familiar with this graphic. It is basically a set of measures that comes from social interventions. And these social interventions are needed, extremely needed, because it is the only way for us to keep the number of cases below the healthcare system capacity. Otherwise, if there's no social interventions, the number of cases will hike up, and that will, will ruin or maybe will affect, the healthcare system capacity, will overload the healthcare system capacity, and that will result in more, death in the people, among the people who are infected. So social interventions is what played an important role in our efforts to flatten the curve. Now let me talk about COVID-19 pandemic and urbanized society, because when we look at this phenomenon, this pandemic, from the beginning, from the time it start to spread from Wuhan, China, to other cities in Europe, in North America, and now in Indonesia or in Southeast Asia in general, there's one striking pattern that we can learn from the way it is spread. That is, the pandemic will be more, will spread more rapidly in urban areas. So urban areas are, deeply vulnerable to pandemic or epidemic because of certain features or certain criteria that cities have, which allow the the virus to spread more rapidly. And one of the key factors that cause the virus to spread more rapidly in urban areas is population density. So if you look at the epicenters of COVID-19 transmission around the world, you can find that most of the epicenters are big cities. And I did some small project 2 months ago to compare the number of infection rates and the population density of 6 cities. And we found consistent correlations between population density and infection rates, as you can see from this graphic. So the cities that we were looking at include Ile-de-France, Paris, Daegu in Korea, so one of the big cities after Seoul in South Korea, Berlin in Germany, Wuhan in China, New York City in the United States, and Barcelona in Spain. And Jakarta we put here just to give a sense of what is the potential number of infection cases in Jakarta. And so you can see here that the more dense a city, the more likely it has a high number of infection cases. So density is one of the key features in urban areas that cause the pandemic to explode massively. And we can learn that from Indonesian experience as at the moment by looking at the epicenters that happen to be in Jakarta, Surabaya, Makassar, and other cities. So there's a consistent pattern here between the population density and the infection rates. Another 2 aspects of cities that also contribute to the escalation of a pandemic, of COVID-19 pandemic, is the volume of activities. So the volume of activities between people in the city also play a significant role in facilitating the spread of the crisis, the spread of the virus more rapidly than ever. As people move from one place to another, the transportations, public transportations are used by people, and this becomes hotspots for virus transmissions. All of this volume of activities, contribute to the growth of the pandemic in the urban cities. And another aspect of cities that also play a role is the built-in environments. I mean, if we compare the urban areas and the rural areas, one of the key difference between the urban from the rural is how we build our environments in such a way so that we feel convenient, we feel comfortable. And one of the comfort that we put into the built-in environment of urban cities is the use of air conditioner. Singapore is one of the cities that use a lot of air conditioning. I think 40% of 40% of the electricity used in Singapore is for air conditioning. And interestingly, there's been a number of studies that show the correlations between SARS, which is the outbreak back in 2003, and the use of air conditioning. And by looking at the nature of the virus that can last longer in cool temperatures, it will, it makes sense that, the use of air conditioning also, allows the virus to, to infect more people. And as we look at cities like Jakarta, Surabaya, and we can think about, how much, spaces that we create in these urban cities, which is very much contained and air conditioned. And this actually becomes a vulnerable place for virus, spread. And it is something that we need to look at as an unintended consequence of the of of the building of our urban environments that depends so much on air conditioned spaces. Now that Indonesia has decided to enter the new normal era, and we and everyone of us know that the decision to enter a new normal era is mostly because of the economic pressures that the government feels due to the fact that for the past 2-3 months our economy has been slowing down, and the growth is very much affected by by the pandemic. And due to the to the economic pressures, the Indonesian government decided to sort of encourage people to embrace new normal as a new way of living through the pandemic. And of course, we can have a debate about whether the new normal is necessary or is well justified, or even is relevant, because if we look at the situation overall in Indonesia in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are still struggling to go over the first wave, right? And people, some people are worried about the second wave, but I keep saying that we do not need to worry about the second wave at the moment, because we're still in the first wave and we haven't seen the peak, and we haven't been able to flatten the curve. So all of the discussion about new normal may not be relevant, but despite of that, maybe we can try to sort of, to dissect what is the normal, what the new normal means, and how exactly we are able to adapt to this new normal, so that we can reach what I call a level of pandemic resilience. Now, the new normal is a condition that is only relevant when you have succeeded in having all of these criteria. Now, this criteria is something that I made based on the suggestions from World Health Organizations. So basically, World Health Organizations has 6 criteria that need to be fulfilled for governments before they reopen their economy. And I squeeze these 6 into 5 key aspects that need to be satisfactorily fulfilled before the government is eligible to say that, hey, now it's time to get into new normal. So those 5 things include high testing rate, tied by surveillance, solid contact tracing, sufficient hospital capacity, and the last one is high risk perception. The first 4 aspects are epidemiological conditions which need to be fulfilled by governments, and it relates to the infrastructures, the health infrastructures that the government has built in order to be able to maintain, to maintain the transmission rate in among the people or in the community. Now, high risk perception is something that I added here because it is one key aspect that needs to be fulfilled as well before we enter the new normal. So this is the point that I would like to highlight in my talk, and how it is extremely important for us to consider and to find ways in improving the level of it. So pandemic resilience is defined as the ability to control the transmission rate. So this is a very simple definition of pandemic resilience. Of course, you can you can have different definition of pandemic resilience from different point of view, but from epidemiological point of view, the resilient capacity of a community or society or a country will be indicated by how much they have a control on the transmission rate. Okay, because this is the core of the problem. Now, transmission rate can be, can go high, can go up, can go down, and it is influenced by two factors that I'm going to elaborate shortly. The first one is the enforcement of social distancing, and this is what governments in Indonesia has been doing. Try to encourage people to keep physical distancing, to close schools and public places, and encourage the use of a mask, facial mask, wash hands, and etc. And the enforcement of social distancing depends on the government policy in terms of the protocols and procedures that are required for the for the community, and need to be compiled by those who are members of the community or of the society. So this is now, this enforced social distancing is the response from the community level or collective level, right? And as I said, it depends on the quality of the government policy as well as the social compliance. Okay. But there's also another level that is crucial to control the transmission rate, which is the individual level. Now, the individual level is very important here because it is the individual who are infected by the virus. It is the individual who share the virus to others. So the behaviors of individuals are absolutely important for us to be able to control the transmission rate. But of course, individual behaviors does not come from anywhere other than the ability of the individual to perceive the risk of COVID-19. So this is what we call as risk perception. It is what informs the individual to maintain safe behavior so that it won't cause the transmission rate to go up. And overall, we can see that the individual behaviors is also shapes the social distancing at the collective level. So they are very much, mutually shaping. But as I said that in my talk, I'm going to explain more about the individual level, and the focus is on risk perception here. So let me give you sort of the theoretical framework of how to measure risk perception, especially in the context of COVID-19. So imagine an individual who is looking at the virus, the coronavirus. And of course, the coronavirus is not this big. So I just, yes. So the individual is looking at the virus, and this is what we call as risk perception, right? Now, we assume that risk perception has a correlations between safe behavior. So the better the risk perception, the higher the risk perception, the better the safe behaviors of the individual. Now, of course, risk perception does not come from the person himself or herself, but it is something that is informed or shaped by the possession of knowledge and the acceptance of information that very much comes from outside, because the individual does not necessarily have the pre-existing knowledge and information about the virus before the virus break started, right? So it is something that comes from outside. So it is knowledge and information that shape this risk perception. And risk perception is the cognitive ability of a person to understand and to take precautionary measures in response to the virus. Now, in our analysis of risk perception, we also look at the extent or the amount of knowledge and information that individual receive. But also we look at the source of the information that comes from outside, because if you're not an epidemiology or someone who are not really cognizant of virus, you need to be supplied information by someone else. And one of the major sources of information in this pandemic is the government. So we also look at how data and information comes from the government, coming from the government, is accepted by the individual. But of course, every individual, like every one of us here, has a filter in accepting information, and this filter is called public trust. So we also look at how public trust is built for the public by the public in accepting information from different sources of information, including, of course, the government. So we have a number of variables here that we need to measure in understanding risk perception. But there's also another factor that need to be considered, which has potential to shape risk perception. And this factor is the material conditions of the person, which is the social and economic conditions. So although you have, if someone has adequate amount of knowledge and information, it does not necessarily shape a good level of risk perceptions if the social and economic condition does not favor this risk perception, because social and economic conditions somehow affect our ability to perceive whether something is dangerous or not. And that's the reason why we included this social and economic condition as one of the factors that shape risk perception. So this is sort of the theoretical framework in our analysis of risk perceptions that we translated into a survey that we conducted almost a month ago. Yes. So my lab, Social Resilience Lab here in NTU, conducted this survey on risk perception in collaboration with Lab for COVID-19. For those of you who are not familiar with Lab for COVID-19, it is one of the voluntary groups that are doing data collections. They are collecting data and informations from all over the country, from every provinces, also kabupatens and kotamadias, and it is based on crowdsourcing. So they don't rely on the government's informations, but mostly from information that comes from citizens. And they did an incredible job in collecting a lot of informations that the government, especially the central governments, does not provide. So I collaborated with Lab for COVID-19 in conducting this survey on risk perception in Jakarta, and within 5 days we started the data collections from May 29 to June 2nd, and we were able to collect 3,079 respondents. So it was quite quite a success. But then after that, we continued to we continue collecting data from all over Jakarta, and a week ago we closed down the we ended the survey, and we have a final number of 206,520 people who participated in our survey. So this is a huge data sets that we were able to collect, and we're still looking at the data and try to find interesting correlations that we can use for making policy recommendation for Jakarta government. So this is the method of data collection and analysis. I don't need to explain this in detail, but these are the profiles of our respondents in terms of gender. Most female responded to our survey. This is in terms of the age. So you can see here the millennial makes the largest group, followed by their older brothers and sisters, and then younger brothers and sisters. And in terms of jobs, we have students and private sector employees as the biggest groups. In terms of education, high school and college degree are the two major groups. We also ask about the current and previous illness that the respondents suffer. So we ask 5 comorbid diseases that are lethal to COVID-19 infection, and about 20% of the respondents have one of these comorbid illness. And this is the distribution of our respondents, which is quite good. Although we have at the phase 1, we have a few kelurahan in Jakarta that do not have respondents, but after we closed the survey a few days ago, we have data from every single kelurahan in Jakarta. So this is the distributions across the kelurahan. Okay, this is one interesting question that we ask, which is about how much or to what extent that they trust this source of information. So we list up 5 sources of information: religious leaders, celebrity, government officials, medical doctors and health experts and families. And interestingly, which is a good news, the medical doctors and health experts are the most trusted group of a source of information. And the least one is, the lowest one is the celebrity and influencers. Religious leaders come second, followed by family, which is very much close with the government officials. So this is how we calculate the risk perception index. So in our index, we have 6 variables, which I elaborated in the theoretical framework just now. Those variables include risk perception, knowledge, information, self-protection, social capital, and economy. And every variable is measured in 5-scale Likert with this in a weight. Okay, so we put more weight on risk perception and self-protection, and this is the way we calculate it. And the result is this. So this is the spider web of each variables based on a survey with 3,000 respondents. So overall, Jakarta residents shortfall on the level of risk perception, as you can see here, which is also correlated with the economy and social conditions. In terms of knowledge and information, it is the level is quite okay, although it can still be improved. But in terms of self-protection, which includes wearing masks, washing hands, keep physical distancing, Jakarta residents are quite, behave in terms of protecting themselves. But of course, we need to measure everything, all of this together so that we can have sort of a way of measuring these variables that will, represent, the reality of these 6, variables. And that comes with this correlation. So this is the correlation between each variable. So we see how one variable negatively or positively correlated with another. And this is very important for us to look at, because it from this, it can give us some information about or some indication of where to start if we want to intervene into these variables. So for example, if you want to increase risk perception, you can just look at which part of these variables that have positive correlation with risk perception. Likewise, if you look at self-protection, you can see how it's correlated with others. It's interesting because we discovered that risk perception has a negative correlation with self-protection here. So this is something that we need to look at in terms of the details of the data, so we can explain why this is the case. And overall, the risk perception index of Jakarta residents is 3.46. So if we have 5 scale of measurements of risk perception index, 1 is for dangerous, 2 is for low, 3 for rather low, 4 for rather high, and 5 for high. Jakarta falls between rather low and rather high, but is closer to rather low. So 3.46 is considered low, and that means we suggest that Jakarta residents are not ready to enter the new normal, because the standard here is the standard for risk perception index is for 4 and above. So the score, it must be 4 and above for a city or a community to be considered prepared to enter the new normal. So to conclude my talk, at 3 points that I would like to highlight here. First, based on the survey that we did of the risk perception, COVID-19 risk perceptions, we can say that Jakarta residents are not ready and not prepared, uh, at least until the index of risk perception reaches, 4 and above. And by maintaining, a risk perception that will help every individual resident to make a good decision whenever they want to travel or to use public transport or maybe to do other activities. The second point here is that, as I already explained in the first slides of my presentation, we need, in addition to epidemiological data that we are seeing every day, that government officials, are saying, and experts are presenting on TV, social media, newspapers, and etc. I would like to emphasize that we also need to base our policy and action on empirical data that reflects the social conditions. And risk perceptions is one of the social conditions that we need uh, to have good understanding, because it will inform our policy and action so that we can have a more effective measures in responding to the crisis. And the last one is that the new normal era, I think, in my opinion, is just a rhetoric. If we really want to, to consider or to make new normal as a way of life, then we need to encourage people or to create policy that will make people have a good perception of COVID-19 risk and to embrace the risk so that they can live through this in a pandemic life, safely. And that ends my presentation. Thank you. Look forward to questions
Thank
from the
you,
audience.
Sulfikar. Very nice and inspiring presentations. We all know that the readiness to face new normal is somehow a bit far away from us in condition with how people perceive the risks of this COVID-19, and also some indicators still moving low of how this really can embrace our policy and also the government attempts to use their authority to set up social schemes, social interactions to overcome these problems. Somehow it's really related to educations, income perhaps, then maybe the participant would like to ask question or give comment on this. In my opinion, that what we believe, what we know, and what we feel, and what we behave somehow in a certain criteria of respondent will be different. Yes, I give a chance to everyone who would like to ask questions. Please use raise hand.
Parfan, can you give me 1 minute to get a drink?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'll be back in a minute.
Okay. Yes, everyone. Co-host, please check the one who wants to ask questions by raising hands. Or maybe you can also type your question in chat.
From Mr. Banu, Pak Afwan. Question from Mr. Banu.
Okay.
Okay, I'm
Okay.
back.
Right. Good. Pak Banu, you can directly address your questions.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Arfan. I want to ask one question, only one question. The new normal isn't back to the normal condition before a pandemic happened. But I believe that the new normal is shifting from the false normalcy to the true sense of normalcy. Could you, Mr. Sulfikar, give the opinion about the new normalcy, but depend on our culture and maybe in development studies perspective? Thank you.
Thank you. Pak.
Thank.
Yes, Pak Sul, you can start respond.
Yeah. Thank you, Pak Banu. Actually, I don't quite understand the questions, but let me try to respond. At my best. So, new normal is a term that was popularized back in 2008 after the global recession. Okay, but the term itself, was invented much earlier and was used a couple of times after 9/11 attack in the United States in 2001. And new normal refers to a condition when a crisis happened, and then people, was able to go through this crisis, but then they have to make some adjustments, some changes in the way of living their life, right? But one thing that we need to highlight here or to emphasize is that new normal is possible only when the crisis has been overcome, or the crisis has slowed down, or the crisis is over. But in a condition or in a situation where the crisis is still ongoing, is still happening, and even is still increasing, new normal is not relevant, and it's even more dangerous. Why? Because the crisis is still ongoing, and the people are encouraged to adopt new normal, which bring her more dangers of being bring give them more or greater risk to being infected. And this is exactly what is happening now in Indonesia, in my opinion, because the government announced the decision to go into new normal, maybe, I don't know, 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, right? 3 weeks ago, or maybe a month ago. And what happened is after, since then, is that the number of cases are growing even faster than before. So you can see that the new normal policy contradicts to the main intention. And for me, I think whether you are looking at it from cultural or social point of view, we still need to base our decisions that the new normal is not a right choice when the crisis is still happening, when the crisis is not over or is not overcome. So I think that's my sort of my response to Pabano, that we need to control the virus first before we start a new normal, before we ask people to go out and keep themselves safe.
Okay, thank you, Pak Sul. I got two questions from my WhatsApp. The first one is from Sinta. She asks, uh, the model of Singapore government apply to these situations, and how could Indonesian's government uh, adapt this policy? This is number one. Number two is, um, do you think all big cities in Southeast Asia uh, have different approaches in terms of government intervention of social interaction?
Okay.
That's from Sinta, Pak Sul. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Businta. So two interesting questions. The first one is about Singapore. Now, Singapore is considered a success story, although the situation is not completely, over. I mean, the COVID-19 situation is completely over. There's still a number of cases popping up every day, but in terms of the scale, we can say that Singapore, is able to control the pandemic successfully. And one of the key reasons why Singapore has been doing a good job in responding to the crisis is due to the history of the country in dealing with SARS outbreak back in 2003. So as we know that coronavirus, the COVID-19 is not the first coronavirus disease. 2003 SARS also erupted in China and then affected a number of cities in Europe and North America, but also Singapore. Singapore was one of the countries that is severely affected by SARS outbreak. So in 2003, about 300 people in Singapore were infected, and it caused 33 people die. And this gives a traumatic experience to the government because they have to shut down the country for for 2 months. Singapore was on lockdown, and it has an economic impact tremendously to the country. And the government and Singapore government learned their lesson from the SARS outbreak. They become aware that Singapore is vulnerable to global outbreak or pandemic, and since then the government, Singapore government, uh, step up its protection measures by doing a number of things, including creating a new institution called National Center for Infectious Disease, which is the institution that play a central role in organizing the efforts in responding to the crisis. At the same time, the Singapore government also, give monies for researchers to conduct research on medical science, virology, and other relevant topics. And this increased the ability of Singapore in responding to the to potential pandemic. So when COVID-19 came to Singapore, the government has been waiting for it, and it proves that everything that the Singapore government has prepared, works successfully, except for one thing, which is the conditions of migrant workers in Singapore that cause the infection rates to go high. I can give you some details later if you're interested about this topic. But after 2 months of lockdown, Singapore is in a stable condition, and people now can go out and resume social and economic activities as like before. Although of course there are still some restrictions in terms of going to work or using public facilities. But one thing that I'm very happy when they were able to do it is that they allow me to go to swimming pools. So now people can go to swimming pools to enjoy the water, etc. Okay, so what Indonesia can learn from Singapore? I think, of course, we can say that it's not fair to compare Indonesia and Singapore because of the size, right? But despite the size difference between Indonesia, which is a huge country, 270 million, and Singapore, which is about 5.7 million, it's about the same size of Surabaya. I think what Indonesia can learn from Singapore government is, I see two things. One is transparency. Transparency of information is very important. It's extremely important in dealing with crisis. And this is something that Indonesia seems to be unable to do due to a number of reasons, one of which is political. But I'm not going to elaborate in details. But transparency, information transparency is a big issue in Indonesia's effort in dealing with COVID-19. And that's why the presence of volunteer groups such as Lapor COVID-19 or Kawal COVID-19 is absolutely important, because it helps the people to understand the scale and the magnitude of the problem. The second thing that Indonesia can learn from Singapore is to learn how to base their policy on science and how to recruit competent people in dealing with the crisis. So I think there's a lack of competence, especially among high officials in Jakarta, in making decisions and taking proper actions to deal with the crisis. And this has to do, I believe, with the political leadership. Political leadership plays an instrumental role for a country to be able to contain the virus. This is proven in successful countries such as New Zealand, Vietnam, Singapore, what else? A number of countries in Europe. So political leadership is, I think, is at the top of criteria for a country to be able to contain the virus. So if you have a strong political leadership that knows what to do, that have competence and capacity in containing the crisis, then the country will be able to overcome the problem. And in Indonesian context, I think this is a big issue that needs to be addressed properly by the public. The second question, I think that's also partially answered the second questions about how the government respond in Southeast Asia responds to the crisis. So I think political leadership is absolutely important. And in the Indonesian context, you can examine the quality of political leadership at the national level, but also at the provincial and municipal level. So governors and mayors are people who play an instrumental role in dealing with the crisis, and their actions, their decision, their sense of crisis are fundamental for the entire community to be able to to overcome the pandemic. Back to you, Pak Arfan.
Okay, thank you, Pak Sul. I don't see raise hands, also chat in the Zoom, but then there is
Alpha,
one.
sorry, I have
Yes.
a question.
Yeah, sure. Sure, Pak Hermanto. You can directly
Okay,
address your question.
okay, thank you, Pak Alvan, for that chance. And good afternoon, Mr. Sulfikar. It's interesting fact from your research results that in general, Jakarta citizens are not ready to be in normal life, new normal. But the fact is that the government it seems forced themselves to citizens all over Indonesia to implement new normal. Uh, Despite the fact that the cases of COVID victims getting higher, I think from the daily report on TV, I think the number is above thousands. Yeah. So I think compared to the beginning or maybe in May, the number is higher nowadays. But in
Yeah.
fact, the government implement new normal. So and also provinces in Indonesia have various cases of COVID victims. So in your opinion, is it from top uh, politician, I mean the government, or maybe from the provincial levels to implement new normal?
Okay, thank you, Pak Hermanto. So as I said that new normal is not relevant in Indonesia, where the situation of COVID-19 is still, you know, in a bad situation. I mean, it's still poor. So, but of course, there are provinces or areas that are relatively, safe and less affected by COVID-19. And I think it's up to the local governments to implement, the so-called new normal. So one example is West Java province, which the governor has declared uh, the end of the PSBB period, right? So now they reopen their social and economic activities, and a number of cities within West Java are now back to normal life. Although I am a bit worried because according to data that Lapor COVID-19 was able to collect from citizens, there are still a number of infection cases that are not reported, and this may cause potential clusters in different places across the provinces. So I think new normal is a sort of a trap, because it pushed the government, especially local governments, to open their economy by undermining the situation at the local level. And this is something that may even increase the risk of infection, because it creates a false a false confidence that the situation has been overcome, the situation has been controlled, and I'm sure the similar situations can be seen in other provinces, except of course in East Java, which is now the highest number of infection cases uh, across the country. But provinces like Jakarta, Banten, or maybe South Sulawesi, and maybe others have this sort of may have this sense of false confidence. One day see the number, but the numbers do not reflect the reality. So that's a problem with our data. And the new normal policy, I think, may become, sort of an entrapment for government to cause even more cases among community. Okay, back to you, Pak Arfan.
Okay, thank you, Pak Sul. We have one more questioner here, Ibu Deti.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Afan. Prof. Sul, if we talk about resilience now, we talk about social economics like our president to open the PSBB, So in Indonesia, as we know, we have a lot of influencer, and they are open donation, so many open donation in Indonesia. So how, as a sociologist, how you face this phenomenon in Indonesia? And do you agree it's happened because our government can't do something quickly? You catch my question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Teddy. It's very interesting questions. So celebrities or famous people or influencers are organizing this donation to collect donation or money from the people in order to help those who are needy, right? And I think this is a very positive and healthy phenomenon, which we need to continue to encourage. Although, of course, there are some donations that are not fully sincere because, they just want to raise their popularity by having this donation, organizing this donation, etc. But to the extent that the donation will eventually, distribute it to the people who need it, that's something that we need to appreciate. So I don't see any problem with that, but it may not be necessarily caused by the failure of the government in distributing social assistance or bansos to lower income families. I think some problems in terms related to the distributions of bansos are caused more by bureaucratic issues in the government, on the side of the government. And I think Indonesian government has enough money to help those at the lower income or lower class group, lower class group people, right? It's just that the bureaucratic hindrance or bureaucratic structures that hinder this, financial assistance to be, quickly distributed among the people. And that is exactly what President Jokowi has complained about in this, in his viral video that we just saw. So I think both sides, I mean, the governments and the community or the society have their own roles in helping, one another. And I totally agree that, we need to see these two aspects because, these are two layers of social resilience that are the basis of the theory of resilience. So I've been working on this concept of social resilience and the two layers, the institutional as well as the community level play an important role and need to be synergized one another so that the entire society is able to go through the crisis, especially the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Okay. Very last questions, Pak Sul, from
No worries.
Aurel.
Yes, yes.
Aurel, please address your question.
Okay, thank you very much. For Mr. Sulkifar.
Sulfikar, Pak.
Sulfikar.
Oh, Sulfikar. Oh, pardon
Sulfikar
me.
Amir.
Pardon me. The first thing I want to say that perhaps for the new normal policies, I don't think I agree with your argument because this is my opinion. In time of health crisis, all aspects of life must be taken into consideration. Uh, that's what the government have done. Yeah, it's not just merely taking a policy based on health aspect, but also on economic, social, and cultural factors. So, in for this case, for this new normal policy, I agree with some literature stating that new normal is a new in attitude and behavior. It's not a way back to old normal. As you said that it's irrelevant or relevant to the habitual or something like that because I understand it as a new habit which means transforming the state of exception into a new normal. So it's a habit, I think. So the second one, this is my question for you. uh, because you discuss risk perception, I want to ask, is risk perception related to threat? Because I have some literatures, I have read some literatures. They suggest that risk perceptions depends on social and personal psychological state, not on disease itself. Uh, the last one is my questions. Thank you very much for the answers.
Yes, Pak
Okay,
Sul.
thank you. Yeah, thank you. Is this your real name or real is Ratu?
Yes, my real name.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Ratu, not
Yeah,
Raja.
it's very good name. Sorry, I didn't mean to make fun of your name, but I'm just curious. Okay, let me show you about new normal. Okay, can you see my slide?
Yes, yes, I
Okay.
can.
Now this is the number of cases updated 2 days ago. Oh, no, 3 days ago, June 26. As you can see here, the curve is still going up. Now, how do you make sure that entering a new normal will not have consequences when the situation that we are seeing today is still like this? New normal is relevant only when you have completed, one round of wave, right? When you have succeeded in flattening the curve, as I said. So if I go back to my slide here, okay. Can you see my slide here?
Yes.
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 Okay. So a new normal is possible only when you reach the right side of the curve. When the curve is declining and closing to the, to zero, that's when the new normal is relevant. Why still a new normal? Why not call old normal? Because the virus is still spreading in society, in community, and we need to maintain our safe behavior so that the virus won't cause a big wave of infection. Now, Indonesia is still on the left side of the curve, and entering a new normal is even more dangerous because you're gonna lead the people to have false convictions that the situation is now normal. You just need to wear, a facial mask. You just need to keep washing your hands and etc. But the risk is still out there, and that's the problem. Right. So, of course, I totally understand that we also need to look at social and economic conditions. But how can resume social and economic activities if the pandemic is still ongoing? If the pandemic has not been well, handled, and if you decide to open, shopping malls, to encourage people to go to work every day like a normal life and etc., that's gonna increase the potential risk of infection. So my critique to the government is that they have not been able to contain the virus. Now they're moving up to the next level. So they fail on one level, and now they want to move to another level. And for me, that's an even more dangerous decision. The second question, which is about or risk, yeah, and of course, risk is always perceived, whether by the people or by the expert. So risk is something that we perceive from the potential dangers that we see in our environment. And no one can actually, can measure, no one can actually measure, the real danger outside, because it is something that may be beyond our ability to measure, right? And even for the most advanced scientific tools, uh, when they use scientific tools to measure risk, it is only a measurement, but it's not the reality itself. So that's why I always say that risk is always perceived, either by the lay people, lay person, or by the experts. The difference is that if the lay people perceive risk with their personal experience, the experts perceive risk by scientific tools, but they are both in a perception. Now, it is true that a risk perception does not represent the whole reality of the danger outside. And I'm not saying that what people perceive is what the reality of the danger. But what I'm saying here is that the perception of risk by the people will inform their safe behavior, right? So the better the perceptions, the better their behaviors in coping with the crisis. And that's why we need to measure this risk perception, so we know, how the people, how people perceive the risk and what needs to be improved, so that this perception, this risk perception, will help the people to maintain safe behavior, and that will lead to the control of the transmission rate. Thank you. Back to you, Pa Arfan.
Okay. Thank you, Pa Sul. Very insightful, and um, will broaden our horizons of how risk perception is really important as a fundamental point to see and portray the situation, so that the decision maker, especially the authority, can really take a very careful consideration of labeling something, just like new normal, for example. They possibly fail to handle the stage, and then they will move on to another stage. Yeah, this is the way that our government perhaps did. As if we look at the curve, it's still upright, moving sharply, grow, and they don't have any such turning point yet. Yeah, still
Yeah.
moving up every day. That's a very bad indicator if the government forced to have a new normal. Maybe we cannot really apply on the nationwide, but then some cities perhaps who has the code of, we have black, blacks, reds, orange, yellow, and then green, perhaps somehow in yellow and green um, conditions. The municipal can take into consideration how to open gradually the public facilities and other thing. Yeah, without any consideration of that, and also protecting the social interactions, especially those who come in and out the area. It will give us some more potentials to back to another stage, back to the stage where we have raising up the growth of COVID-19. Thank you very much, Pak
That's
Sulfikar.
just one
Yes,
last information that I would like to share. So
yes.
at the moment, my lab, my team with Lapor COVID-19 is conducting a survey of risk perception in Surabaya. So we are working with the city governments in doing this survey, and so far we have 5,000 respondents.
Okay, great. Right. Before we end, let me give, on behalf of ITS, deep appreciations of your participations and sharing ideas, Pak Sul. Now allow me to hand in
Certificate.
virtual certificate. Yes.
Wow.
Wow, this is so cool.
On behalf of director and also the dean and the Department of Development Studies, Institute Technology 10 November, I proceed this certificate and initially invite you back in EcoDev 2020 in early December this year.
I
Thank
look
you, Pak
forward to it.
Sulfikar.
Thank you so much, Pak Arfan. It's been a pleasure to give this talk and to talk to participants. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, Pak Sul.
Yeah.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I go back to Ibu Dati as the master of ceremony. Thank you, Bu Dati.
Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Arfan, and thank you for Pak Su as a brilliant presentation, I think, for today. So,
Thank you.
ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our conference. I just want to say thank you for participating to Development Talk 3 and see you on the next Development Talk, the next session. Thank you for all joining with us. Bye-bye. Good
Bye-bye. Thank
afternoon
you.
all.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you, Pak Su.
Yeah.
So, we will photo session.
Boleh, photo session dulu.
Okay,
Please
okay.
everyone, listen on your video.
Yeah.
And then let Ibu Deti take for several page, yeah, because this is more than one page. Okay, Bu Deti.
Okay. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, has done. One again.
Yeah, you can moving to another page to cover the
Oh
more.
yeah, I'm sorry. Wait. Yo, 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Okay, we're done.
Done. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Oke, terima kasih Bapak Ibu yang telah join. Anak-anakku mahasiswa SP, brilian. Terima kasih. Kita akan ketemu lagi nanti di next development talk. Sepertinya kita ada tamu dari ISS nanti dari Den Haag, Belanda. ISS itu adalah International for Development Studies-nya di The Hague. Mungkin sekitar September Oktober kita sedang arrange itu. Kalau tidak nanti dari ada Sussex University atau dari Newcastle Australia. Kita sedang arrange untuk mereka bisa sajikan development talk. Tentunya nanti ada bagian yang beririsan dengan mata kuliah di semester 3 ya. Anak-anakku sekalian, mata kuliah di semester 3. Dan nanti juga ada rencana mata kuliah di semester 3 itu ada yang di ASO bersama-sama dengan dosen